I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, when my phone buzzed. It was a voicemail from Lila. Odd, since she usually texts. I pressed play, expecting her cheerful voice, but instead there was silence. A long, unnerving silence. Then, just before it ended, I heard something. A faint, muffled cry. It sent a chill down my spine. My name is Margot, and I'm a dental hygienist. My life is pretty ordinary, filled with routine checkups and the occasional dental emergency. But that morning, everything felt different. That voicemail was like a dark cloud settling over my sunny kitchen. I tried calling Lila back immediately. No answer. I texted her, hoping for a quick reply, but the minutes ticked by with nothing. As I sat there, my mind wandered back to the last few weeks. Lila had been withdrawing from family events, always with some vague excuse. I'd brushed it off as her being busy with work or just needing space. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ethan, my husband, walked in, still in his pajamas. "You look worried," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "It's Lila," I replied, replaying the voicemail for him. His brow furrowed as he listened. "Maybe it's nothing," he said, trying to reassure me. "You know how phones can be." I nodded, but my gut told me otherwise. "I think I need to go see her," I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. Ethan didn't argue. That's one of the things I love about him. He's always been my rock, supporting me even when I'm chasing shadows. The drive to Lila's place felt longer than usual. My mind was racing, filled with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I thought about the last time I saw her. She seemed fine, maybe a bit tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps? When I arrived, I knocked on the door, trying to keep my anxiety in check. Carter, my son-in-law, answered with his usual charming smile, but it felt different this time. Forced, maybe. "Margot, what a surprise," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Lila's in the kitchen." I found her there, making breakfast for Olive. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I got your voicemail," I said, watching her closely. Her face went blank for a moment, then she forced a smile. Oh, that must have been Olive playing with my phone. I wanted to believe her, but something in her voice didn't sit right. I watched as she turned back to the stove, her movements a bit too deliberate. Olive was sitting at the table, drawing. She looked up and gave me a big smile, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. Carter joined us, leaning against the counter. "Everything okay?" he asked, his eyes darting between Lila and me. "Just checking in," I said casually, though my heart was pounding. "We missed you at dinner last weekend." Lila shrugged, not meeting my gaze. "Work's been crazy." We made small talk, but the air felt thick with unspoken words. Lila seemed distracted, her eyes flicking to Carter whenever he spoke. I noticed the way she flinched slightly when he touched her shoulder. It was subtle, but it was there. As I left, I hugged Lila a little tighter than usual. "Call me if you need anything," I whispered, hoping she'd hear the deeper meaning. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I thought about the voicemail, the silence, and that faint cry. It echoed in my mind, urging me to dig deeper. I knew I had to find out what was really going on, even if it meant uncovering something I wasn't ready to face. That night, as I lay in bed, the question lingered in my mind. What was Lila hiding, and how far was I willing to go to protect my daughter? The next day, I found myself back at Lila's doorstep. I hadn't planned on visiting again so soon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was bubbling beneath the surface. As I knocked, I rehearsed my lines in my head, trying to sound casual yet concerned. Lila opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mom, you're back already?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Thought I'd drop by. Maybe take you and Olive out for lunch." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Carter's home today. Maybe another time." I could feel the tension in her voice, like a tightly wound coil ready to snap. "Just a quick bite," I insisted. "I miss spending time with my girls." Carter appeared behind her, his smile as polished as ever. "Margot, twice in 2 days? We're honored." I forced a smile, feeling the insincerity seep through his words. "What can I say? I love my family." Lila looked between us, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. Fear? Resignation? Whatever it was, it made my heart ache. "Actually," Carter said, wrapping an arm around Lila's shoulders, "we were just about to head out ourselves." "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Just errands," Lila replied quickly, her eyes avoiding mine. "Groceries and stuff." I nodded. though my instincts screamed that there was more to the story. All right, another time then. As I turned to leave, Olive bounded into the room, her little face lighting up when she saw me. "Grandma," she squealed, wrapping her arms around my legs. I knelt down to her level, ruffling her hair. "Hey, sweetheart. How about a playdate at my place soon?" Olive nodded enthusiastically, but Carter's voice cut in, smooth and controlling. "We'll see, Olive. Maybe next weekend." I kissed Olive's forehead, feeling the weight of Carter's gaze on me. "I'll hold you to it," I said, standing up. Walking back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed a carefully choreographed performance. Lila's evasiveness, Carter's charm. It all felt like part of a script designed to keep me at bay. Back home, I found Ethan in the garage, tinkering with his latest project. "How'd it go?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Strange," I replied, leaning against the workbench. Lila seemed off. And Carter, well, he's always too smooth for my liking. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe you should talk to Jonah. He might have noticed something too." I considered it. Jonah and Lila were close, always had been. If anyone could help me piece this puzzle together, it was him. Later that evening, I called Jonah. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Hey Mom, what's up? Just wanted to chat," I said, trying to sound casual. "Have you talked to Lila lately?" "Yeah, a few days ago," he replied. "Why?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "She seems distant. Have you noticed anything?" There was a pause on the line, then Jonah sighed. "Actually, yeah. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed, like she couldn't catch a break." I could hear the concern in his voice, mirroring my own. "Did she say why?" "Not directly," Jonah admitted. "But she hinted at feeling trapped. I thought it was just work stress." A chill ran through me. Trapped. The word hung heavy in the air, echoing my own fears. "I think there's more to it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jonah was silent for a moment, then he said, "What do you want to do?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. I need to find out what's really going on. But I can't do it alone. "I'm with you, Mom," Jonah said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Whatever you need." Hanging up, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I wasn't alone in this. With Jonah by my side, I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how deep or dark it might be. As I lay in bed that night, I replayed the day's events in my mind. Lila's hesitation, Carter's controlling presence, Olive's innocence caught in the middle. The pieces were all there, scattered and incomplete. But I was ready to put them together, one way or another. I closed my eyes, the question that had haunted me since that voicemail still lingering. What was Carter hiding? And how far would I go to protect my daughter and granddaughter? The following weekend, Jonah and Mia invited us over for dinner. It was a welcome distraction from the gnawing worry that had taken root in my mind. As we sat around their dining table, the warmth of family camaraderie filled the room. But underneath, I felt a simmering tension, like a pot on the verge of boiling over. "How's Lila been?" Jonah asked casually, passing me the salad bowl. I hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who nodded slightly, encouraging me to speak. "She's been distant," I admitted, my voice low. "There's something going on, and I'm worried." Mia, ever the perceptive one, leaned forward. "Do you think it's Carter?" I nodded, feeling the weight of unspoken fears pressing down on me. "There's something off about him. I can't put my finger on it, but Lila's not herself." Jonah exchanged a glance with Mia, then turned back to me. "I've been thinking the same. Lila's always been strong, but lately she seems subdued." Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "We need to find out what's really happening. Maybe talk to Lila again, but carefully." Just then, the doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Jonah got up to answer it, and a moment later, he returned with an unexpected guest, Carter. "Hope I'm not interrupting," Carter said, his smile wide and disarming. "Lila mentioned you were having dinner, and I thought I'd swing by." My heart sank. His presence felt like a shadow cast over the evening. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "You're always welcome." Carter took a seat, his eyes scanning the room, as if assessing the dynamics. "Lila's at home with Olive. She sends her love." As we resumed dinner, the conversation felt strained, with Carter steering it towards superficial topics. But underneath, I sensed an undercurrent of tension, like a predator circling its prey. Mia, trying to lighten the mood, asked Carter about his work. "How's the marketing world treating you?" He launched into a rehearsed spiel about his latest project, his words smooth and practiced. But I noticed how he avoided eye contact, his gaze flickering nervously around the room. Jonah, ever the teacher, shifted the conversation back to family. You know, Olive's been doing great in school. She's such a bright kid. Carter's smile faltered, just for a moment. Yeah, she's a smart one, he said, his voice lacking the usual warmth. As the evening wore on, I watched Carter closely, noting the subtle cracks in his facade. The way his fingers tapped restlessly on the table, the slight edge in his voice when he spoke about Lila. It was all there, hidden beneath layers of charm. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room, Carter excused himself to take a call. As soon as he was out of earshot, Jonah turned to me. Did you see that? I nodded, my heart pounding. He's hiding something. I can feel it. Mia looked concerned. What do we do? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. We need to dig deeper. Find out what he's really up to. Just then, Carter returned, his expression unreadable. Sorry about that, he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. Work never stops, does it? We all forced smiles, the tension palpable. As the evening drew to a close, Carter said his goodbyes, his charm back in place. But as he left, I caught a fleeting look in his eyes, one that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a look of control, of someone who knew they held the upper hand. Driving home, I replayed the evening in my mind, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. Carter's unexpected visit, his restless demeanor, the way he seemed to monitor us. It all pointed to something deeper, something darker. I glanced at Ethan, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. We need to act, I said, breaking the silence. Before it's too late. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. We'll figure it out, Margot. Together. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I didn't know what Carter was hiding, but I was more resolved than ever to protect my family. No matter what it took, I would uncover the truth and bring my daughter back from the shadows. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee in front of me. It was one of those rare moments when the house was silent, and I could almost hear my own thoughts weaving a tangled web of worry and determination. I knew I had to confront Lila, but the fear of pushing her away gnawed at me. Ethan walked in, sensing my unease. You look like you've been up all night, he said, taking a seat across from me. I have, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I keep thinking about Lila. I need to talk to her, but I'm scared I'll make things worse. He reached across the table, his hand warm and reassuring. You won't. She needs to know we're here for her, no matter what. His words gave me a sliver of courage. I nodded, knowing he was right. I had to act, even if it meant risking everything. Later that day, I found myself outside Lila's house again, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked, trying to steady my breathing. When Lila opened the door, her eyes widened with surprise. Mom, what are you doing here? She asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I need to talk to you, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Can we go for a walk? She hesitated, glancing back into the house. Carter's out, she said finally, stepping outside and closing the door behind her. As we walked down the street, I chose my words carefully. Lila, I've noticed you've been distant, and I know something's wrong. She looked straight ahead, her face a mask of composure. I'm just busy, Mom. You know how it is. I stopped walking, turning to face her. Lila, I got a voicemail from you. It was just silence and a cry. I'm worried. Her facade cracked just for a moment, and I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. That must have been a mistake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila, you can tell me anything, I urged, my heart aching for her. She sighed, looking down at her feet. It's complicated, Mom. Carter, he just gets stressed sometimes. I felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the situation that made her feel trapped. Lila, this isn't just stress. I'm here to help you, but you have to let me. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know what to do, she confessed, her voice breaking. I reached out, pulling her into a hug. We'll figure it out together, I promised, feeling her tremble in my arms. As we stood there, I realized the depth of her fear, and it only fueled my resolve. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. That evening, back at home, I shared the conversation with Ethan. She's scared, Ethan. Really scared. He nodded, his expression grim. We need to find something concrete, something that can help her. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Jonah. Found something. Can we meet? Ethan and I exchanged a look, our hearts in sync with the urgency of the situation. We drove to Jonah's place, where he greeted us with a folder in hand. I did some digging, Jonah said, his voice low. Carter's got a history. Financial troubles, shady business deals. It's all here. I flipped through the papers, each revelation like a punch to the gut. Why didn't we see this before? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and guilt. He's good at hiding it, Jonah replied. But this gives us leverage. We can use it to help Lila. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. We need to show this to Lila. She needs to know she has options. As we sat there, the weight of our discovery hung heavy in the air. It was a turning point, a chance to shift the power dynamic and give Lila the courage to break free. But just as we were making plans, Jonah's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face paling. "It's Lila," he said, his voice urgent. "She's asking for help." Now, the room went still, the gravity of the situation sinking in. We had to act, and fast. The stakes had never been higher, and the time for waiting was over. As we rushed to her aid, I felt a fierce protectiveness surge within me. This was my family, and I would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew we had to face it together, armed with the truth and the unbreakable bond of family. As we sped towards Lila's house, the air was thick with urgency. Jonah drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Ethan sat beside him, silent but alert. I was in the back seat, clutching my phone, waiting for any updates from Lila. The message had been brief, just enough to convey the desperation in her voice. "Help! Now!" When we arrived, the front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. My heart pounded as I pushed it open, calling out for Lila. The house was eerily quiet, each step echoing in the silence. "Lila!" I called, my voice trembling. There was a faint sound from upstairs, a muffled sob. I rushed up the stairs, Jonah and Ethan close behind. We found Lila in Olive's room, holding her daughter close. Olive was crying, her small frame shaking with fear. "Lila, what happened?" I asked, kneeling beside them. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Carter, he just snapped. I told him I needed space, and he lost it." Ethan crouched down, his voice calm but firm. "Where is he now?" Lila shook her head. "He stormed out. I don't know where he went." I pulled her into a hug, feeling the weight of her fear. "You're safe now," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. The threat of Carter still loomed large. Jonah looked around, his expression tense. "We need to get you both out of here, just in case he comes back." Lila nodded, her resolve hardening. "I can't stay here. Not anymore." As we gathered their things, I felt a mix of relief and dread. We were taking action, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. I glanced at Olive, who clung to Lila, her eyes wide and scared. I wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but the truth was, I didn't know what lay ahead. Back at our house, we settled Lila and Olive in the guest room. The familiar surroundings offered a small comfort, but the tension lingered in the air. Over dinner, the conversation was subdued, each of us lost in our thoughts. After we put Olive to bed, Lila joined us in the living room. Her face was drawn, the weight of the day etched in every line. "I can't believe it came to this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Lila. You're protecting Olive, and that's what matters." She nodded, though her eyes were filled with uncertainty. "What if he comes after us? What if he tries to take Olive?" I felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. "We won't let that happen," I said, my voice firm. "We have the information Jonah found. We can use it to keep him at bay." Lila looked at Jonah, who nodded. "It's enough to get a restraining order, at the very least. We'll make sure you're safe." As we discussed our next steps, a new determination took root within me. I had been driven by a need to protect my family, but now the stakes were higher. It wasn't just about keeping Lila and Olive safe. It was about ensuring they could live freely, without fear. But even as we made plans, a part of me wondered about Carter. What had driven him to this point? Was he truly irredeemable, or was there something deeper at play? The questions gnawed at me, challenging my perception of justice and revenge. Was I seeking to protect my family, or was I driven by a need to punish Carter for the pain he'd caused? The next morning, as I prepared breakfast, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. It was a photo of Lila and Olive taken from a distance with a single word beneath it. "Soon." My blood ran cold, the implications clear. Carter was watching us, waiting for his moment. I showed the message to Ethan, who frowned, his expression darkening. "We need to go to the police," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision. We were in deeper than I'd imagined, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my family, even if it meant facing my own fears and doubts. As we prepared to take the next steps, I felt a flicker of hope. We were united, stronger together than we were alone. And in the face of uncertainty, that was enough to keep us moving forward. The morning after receiving Carter's chilling message, I found myself at the police station, my heart heavy with dread. Ethan stood beside me, his presence a steadying force, as we explained the situation to the officer. Lila sat quietly, holding Olive on her lap, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. "We need protection," I said, my voice firm despite the anxiety knotting my stomach. "Carter's been threatening us." The officer nodded, taking notes. "We can issue a temporary restraining order, but you'll need to provide evidence of these threats." I handed over the folder Jonah had compiled, the weight of its contents pressing down on me. This should be enough. After what felt like an eternity, we left the station with a promise of action, but the reassurance felt hollow. The system moved slowly, and Carter was unpredictable. As we drove home, the reality of our situation settled over me like a dark cloud. We were doing everything we could, yet it felt like we were always one step behind. Back at the house, Lila and Olive retreated to their room, while Ethan and I sat in the living room, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fears. "What if this isn't enough?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "We have to believe it will be. We can't let him win by living in fear." His words were meant to comfort, but the nagging doubt remained. I felt like we were fighting a battle on shifting sands, never sure of our footing. Just then, Jonah arrived, his expression tense. "I did some more digging," he said, handing me a new set of documents. "Carter's been making some shady deals. If we can expose him, it might help." I glanced through the papers, feeling a flicker of hope. "This could work," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The stakes were high, and the risks even higher. As we discussed our next steps, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt into my throat, fear gripping me. Ethan went to answer it, and I held my breath, expecting the worst. But it was just Mia, her face a mix of concern and determination. "I thought you might need some backup," she said, joining us in the living room. Her presence was a balm, reminding me that we weren't alone in this fight. We had family, and that was our greatest strength. As the day wore on, we planned and prepared, but the tension never left the room. Each sound outside made me jump. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt of fear through me. It was a waiting game, and the uncertainty was suffocating. That evening, as we gathered for dinner, Lila spoke up, her voice tremulous but steady. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I need to take control." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We're with you, whatever you decide." She nodded, drawing strength from our support. "I want to confront him. I need to tell him it's over." The thought of facing Carter made my blood run cold, but I understood Lila's need for closure. It was a risk, but one she was willing to take. As we solidified our plan, a sense of resolve settled over us. We were taking back control, refusing to be victims any longer. But even as we prepared, a part of me feared the unknown. Carter was unpredictable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he had one last card to play. The next day, as we set out to meet Carter, my heart was a storm of emotions. Fear, anger, determination. They all swirled within me, pushing me forward even as doubt whispered at the edges of my mind. We arrived at a neutral location, a small cafe where Lila had arranged to meet Carter. I watched from a distance, my heart in my throat as she approached him. Ethan and Jonah flanked me, ready to step in if needed. As Lila spoke to Carter, I saw the tension in her posture, the way she squared her shoulders against his presence. Their conversation was too far away to hear, but I could see the anger in Carter's eyes, the way his hands clenched into fists. Suddenly, Carter's demeanor shifted, his expression turning cold and calculating. He said something, and Lila's face went pale. She turned to us, her eyes wide with fear. "He's threatening to take Olive," she said, her voice shaking as she reached us. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the final twist in a nightmare that seemed never-ending. We had pushed Carter into a corner, and now he was lashing out with everything he had. As we regrouped, the enormity of the situation crashed over me. We were fighting for Lila's freedom, for Olive's future, and the path ahead was more uncertain than ever. But in that moment, surrounded by my family, I felt a fierce determination rise within me. We would not be defeated. We would stand together, no matter what came next. The air was thick with tension as we approached Carter's house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the driveway. This was it, the moment we had been building towards, the confrontation that would determine our future. I felt a mix of fear and determination coursing through me, each step forward a battle against the instinct to turn and run. Ethan, Jonah, and I moved as one, a united front. Lila was with us, her resolve steely despite the tremor in her hands. Olive was safely with Mia, away from the chaos that was about to unfold. We knocked on the door, and it swung open to reveal Carter, his expression a mask of surprise quickly replaced by a smirk. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, leaning against the doorframe with feigned nonchalance. "We need to talk," Lila said, her voice steady. Carter's eyes flicked to me, then back to Lila. "Is this some kind of intervention?" "You could say that," Jonah replied, his voice calm but firm. "We know what you've been doing, Carter." Carter's smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Lila stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "It's over, Carter. I'm done living in fear." For a moment, Carter said nothing, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Then, with a sudden burst of anger, he slammed the door shut, locking us out. I felt a surge of panic, but Ethan was already moving, pounding on the door. "Carter, open up. We just want to talk." There was a tense silence, and then the door opened again, Carter's demeanor cold and calculating. "Fine. Let's talk." We entered the house, the familiar surroundings now tinged with a sense of foreboding. Carter led us to the living room, where we all stood, the air crackling with tension. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me how to live my life?" Carter said, his voice laced with bitterness. "You have no idea what it's like." "I know enough," Lila replied, her voice strong. "Enough to know I deserve better. Olive deserves better." Carter's eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too, a vulnerability, a crack in his armor. "I was trying to protect us," he said, his voice dropping. "By controlling us?" Lila shot back, her words sharp. "That's not protection, Carter. That's fear." As they spoke, I watched Carter closely, seeing the battle waging within him. He was a man cornered, his facade crumbling under the weight of his own insecurities. "You think you're so righteous," Carter said, turning his gaze to me. "But you don't know what it's like to feel powerless." I stepped forward, my heart pounding. "I know more than you think," I replied, my voice steady. "And I know that power doesn't come from control. It comes from love and respect." Carter's expression wavered, and for a moment, I saw the man beneath the mask, a man driven by fear and insecurity, trapped in a cycle of his own making. The room was silent, the tension palpable. Then, in a move that surprised us all, Carter sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I don't want to lose Olive," he said, his voice breaking. Lila knelt beside him, her anger tempered by compassion. "You need help, Carter. We can't do this anymore." For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation would end in a stalemate, but then Carter looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of desperation and surrender. "I don't know how to change," he admitted, the words raw and vulnerable. It was the unexpected twist we hadn't anticipated, a moment of clarity in the midst of chaos. Carter wanted to change, but he didn't know how. "We'll help you," Lila said softly, her voice filled with a resolve that surprised even me. "But you have to let us go." Carter nodded, the fight leaving him. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." As we left the house, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't the resolution I had envisioned, but it was a resolution nonetheless. Carter had chosen to face his demons, and in doing so, he had given us the freedom we sought. Walking away, I realized that the confrontation had brought us face to face with the core themes of our journey: revenge, justice, and ultimately, forgiveness. It wasn't about defeating Carter. It was about finding a path to healing for all of us. As we drove home, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a gentle twilight. It felt like a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and move forward, stronger and more united than ever before. The house felt different now, filled with the comforting sounds of family. Lila and Olive had moved in with us, and the change was palpable. It was as if the walls themselves had relaxed, shedding the tension that had gripped us for so long. I watched as Lila sat at the dining table, her focus on a new graphic design project. Her face was serene, a quiet confidence replacing the shadows that had haunted her. Olive played nearby, her laughter a sweet melody that filled the room. It was a reminder of what we had fought for: a life free from fear, a future filled with hope. I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing we had reached a turning point. Ethan joined me in the kitchen, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "They look happy," he said, nodding towards Lila and Olive. "They do," I replied, leaning into him. "It's a new beginning." As we prepared dinner, Jonah and Mia arrived, their presence adding to the warmth of the evening. We gathered around the table, the conversation light and filled with laughter. It was a stark contrast to the tension that had once defined our lives. After dinner, Lila stood up, holding a small stack of papers. "I have something to share," she said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. We watched as she unveiled her latest design, a vibrant piece that captured the essence of freedom and resilience. It was a testament to her journey, a symbol of her newfound independence. "It's beautiful," Jonas said, admiration in his voice. Lila smiled, her eyes bright with gratitude. "It's a reflection of everything I've learned. About strength, about family." We applauded, the room filled with a sense of accomplishment and unity. It was a moment of closure, a reminder of how far we had come. Later, as the evening wound down, Lila handed me an envelope. "This came for you," she said, her tone thoughtful. I opened it, finding a letter from Carter. His words were unexpected, a heartfelt apology, an acknowledgement of his faults, and a plea for forgiveness. It was a twist I hadn't anticipated, a reminder that redemption was possible, even for him. I read the letter aloud, the room silent as we absorbed its contents. Carter's words were sincere, filled with a vulnerability that hinted at change. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, his voice gentle. "I think it's a start," I replied, folding the letter. "But forgiveness is a journey, not a destination." Lila nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "I hope he finds peace," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. As we sat together, I reflected on our journey. We had faced challenges that tested us, pushed us to our limits. But through it all, we had emerged stronger, more united than ever before. The themes of revenge and justice had woven through our story, shaping our actions and decisions. But in the end, it was love and forgiveness that had guided us towards healing. As the night drew to a close, I felt a sense of closure, yet a lingering question remained. Could Carter truly change? Would he find the redemption he sought? It was a question that hung in the air, a reminder that life was filled with uncertainties. But as I looked around at my family, I knew we would face whatever came next together. Our journey was far from over, but we were ready for whatever lay ahead. In that moment, I realized that the true strength of our family lay not in our ability to avoid conflict, but in our capacity to overcome it. We had been tested, and we had prevailed, bound by love and resilience. As I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had found our new dawn, and it was brighter than I had ever imagined.